Hello, fellow book nerds. Let's talk about whether the sequel lived up to the first book. Hello, everyone. This is Gabby, and today we are talking about He Who Drowned the World by Shelley Parker-Chan. He Who Drowned the World is the sequel to She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker-Chan. And if you don't know, I'll give you a brief synopsis of this because obviously I don't want to spoil book two. But She Who Became the Sun is a queer gender-bent retelling of the rise to power of the first emperor of the Ming dynasty. So we follow a girl who is a peasant, she's got a brother, and her brother gets given a fortune of greatness, and she is told she has no fortune, there's no future for her. So when her brother dies from starvation, she decides to take things into her own hands and take his destiny. So she lives as a man, becomes a monk, and then things just spiral so much out of control. So She Who Became the Sun was one of my favorite books of the year when it came out, which I think it was 2021. So it's been a while, 2 years since book one. So safe to say I didn't really remember anything. I had to read a whole synopsis, summary online, then I rewatched my own review to get a feeling of what it was, because I was excited about it, but 2 years is a long time and so much happened in book one. But surprisingly, I actually did not have much problem once I did a little bit of studying on the side. I didn't have too much of a problem getting into this book. It's a sequel, so I do want to talk a little bit about spoilers. So the first section will be non-spoiler and the second will have spoilers, so I'll clearly tell you when. Reading this book was wild because I don't know what I expected. I feel like it is much, much darker than its predecessor, although already the predecessor was pretty dark. But even the author said in a Goodreads thing, I think, or maybe at the end, that this is a much darker story, and that was intentional. But where do I even start with this? This will be different than my normal reviews when we have a very clearly laid out structure. This is just more me sharing my experience with you. How would I describe He Who Drowned the World? It's like torture porn, but not like Saw is a torture porn. It's there's a lot of torture and a lot of porn, and sometimes the two intermingle, if that makes sense. So this story is incredibly dark. I will say that there was a lot of time when specifically sexuality and intercourse and sexual acts were used as a power play, were used to manipulate, were used to overpower and take ownership of a situation. So obviously there's some dubious consent in that anyway, and there's also a lot of mind games. So that's something you don't enjoy, I wouldn't say this book is for you. And it's very graphic, not in the nature of the violence or of the sex. It's not super described on the page, but definitely there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of, like I said, manipulation through intercourse. And the story is about fundamentally broken people. If you like likable, redeemable characters, this book is not for you. They have maybe 2 likable characters, and both of them don't really get their time to shine. And weirdly, something that I noticed about this book, so our main character is Zhu Chongba, but he changed his name in this one actually to be Zhu Huanzheng is the new name of Zhu Chongba, but we're gonna just call him Zhu because everyone calls her Zhu. She's actually a woman. I will say sometimes he, because he is a he in the story, in other people's experiences, but she is a she in her own experience, and maybe a mix of both. Something that I really liked in this first book was how much it examined gender, and I do feel like this book was also incredibly focused on gender, but maybe even to the point of obsession. I feel like obviously this is a very different society, so maybe this is what it was like, but I feel like the amount of vitriol for femininity, or men who were even slightly different from the norm, was insane and intense and really weird for me to identify with as a person living in 21st century. But that's not to say in the 14th century it wasn't like that, especially in the Mongol Empire. I know that Mongols were known, for their masculinity, for riding the horses, for being extreme warriors, for their brutality. So I appreciate that maybe in that society even a man who's slightly effeminate and just likes books rather than liking war would be considered an outcast. So that was, oh, I almost want to say that part of the book, you had to a little bit suspend your disbelief, just how strict the gender binary was, but at the same time, maybe that's what it was like. So maybe it's not even suspending your disbelief. It's maybe people were this extreme, and there's a lot of misogyny, a lot of vitriol and hatred towards women, and it's examined, but because of the time period, it's kind of just like taken, and that's rough to read. And yeah, there's a lot of gender stuff, which was an interesting conversation, so I would recommend if you're interested in that type of conversation. But I'm just trying to set the scene of what you're getting yourself into. Whether the sequel lived up to the first book for me is a very hard question to answer, because I really don't know. I didn't rate this book. I don't know what I'm gonna rate this book. It was a weird journey because I feel like I really enjoyed the beginning. There was a little bit slow towards like the second 2/3 because I was like, it's just a battle after battle after battle. So the first book, obviously, we set up Ju's life, we established the society as is and its beginnings of the rebellion, of the war, right? So it's our first Game of Thrones book kind of vibe. And then obviously the sequel, or Game of Thrones, is many books, but this is just a duology. So in the sequel, it's all about the battle. It's all about the war. The war is one constant in this book. It's just we fight a fight after fight after fight. And I don't always love that, but I think this was done pretty interestingly. There were a lot of interesting situations that we had to fight our way through. I did start slightly skimming those fight scenes after a while, but they're not like this person hit with this knife and blah blah blah. It's about the strategy, it's about cunning, it's about outsmarting your opponent. There were a lot of moving parts that you had to kind of keep your eye out. I think that part was done pretty well because we get POVs from all the major characters. So I felt like almost the story wasn't really Ju's story per se. I feel like she had like less page time than her opponent. So basically we'd go by a city, and in that city we'd go from a person's perspective. So we would have whole paragraphs of other characters, whole chapter dedicated to other characters' POV, and we go through their day and we understand what they do and we understand who they are. But then Ju almost had to share her POVs with another character. I'm not going to spoil, but because of that, I felt like I got so much less of her. And whereas the first book was her story, this book did not feel like her story. It was like she was a character in the story, but it wasn't about her necessarily. I like the choice because those were incredibly interesting and fascinating characters that we ended up following, but it definitely distanced me a lot from Ju. And then I also feel like there was a character that I'm going to mention this in the spoiler section as well, that was kind of made a really big deal at the end of book 1, their choice, and now in book 2 they were sidelined for 90% of the book. So I feel like maybe the book wasn't what I expected, because firstly, for some reason I didn't think this was a duology, so I was totally expecting this to be just book 2 in a series. So I also thought this would like play out differently. And I gotta say, the writing is really amazing. The characters are incredibly fleshed out. There is so much interesting stuff there. There's so much meat on the bones, but at the same time, the characters are incredibly unlikable. They keep making really terrible choices, but you really see where they're coming from. So in the end, I did enjoy that. I did like how complicated, messed up the characters were, but it is relentless. You're like in these people's heads, and they just make a mistake after hateful choice and hateful choice, and you're like, is there anyone kind in this world? And then that one kind person gets snuffed out, and you're like, what the hell is happening? So it's relentless is what I wanted to say. And I did read this book really, really quickly. I think pretty much in 2 days, because I'm going on holiday today. So if I wanted to film this video, I had to finish reading this. I'm not going to take this break with me. I think it was just a lot. I was just like bombarded with just like horrific stuff all the time. Terrible perspective. People who just hate themselves so much. It was a bit tiring to be in their head. But all of that to say, I think that it was executed really well. I would recommend this whole duology if you really like Game of Thrones. I think this is the type of story that is similar, that it's all about the political machinations, about being smarter, being cunning. I mean, this is like Game of Thrones on a little smaller scale, because obviously it's just 2 books, it's just like handful of POVs, not like 20, 30 or whatever it is in Game of Thrones. But I just feel like it's an interesting piece of history that you're getting, and it's a very brutal and honest look at why hurt people, and why imposing our ideas onto people of what the gender or they're meant to be, or what a warrior is, what a man is, what a woman is very harmful, and it will come out in other ways, and it will be the downfall of society, of them, of whatever. Maybe in real life it won't be as dramatic as this, but maybe it will be, you know? So overall, I did really enjoy it. I would say it was probably like a 4-star for me. Did I like as much the first book? I don't remember exactly, but I think maybe I liked the first book a little bit more, just because there was a little bit more variety. We're still getting to know the characters. Some of them were way more likable and redeemable at that point of the story, and it was interesting to see them come from these pretty normal people to really messed up people. And I did like the ending, even if it felt slightly abrupt, the change in perspective of the main character, but at the same time it did definitely build a little bit. So let's maybe just mention a couple of spoilers now, but yeah, if you're just here for the non-spoiler section, I think it's worth it. I think if anything I said sounds good to you, I think it's worth your time, because it is so well written. It's such a good character study, and I don't think I've read anything quite like it in a long while. So I think the depth of character specifically is not something we see often, and it was just examined so masterfully. So yeah, I think 4 stars. I liked it. But let's get into some spoilers, and maybe I can tell a little couple things that actually did niggle at me a little bit and annoy me a little bit. Okay, spoilers. I think my biggest gripe, is it my biggest gripe? There's just a couple of gripes, right? So the fact that Ma, right, so that's Ju's wife, what is a big point at the end of first book, that she has to choose whether she wants to go with Ju and be the empress and be his queen and her queen, and you know, do this whole thing. She's not in the book for 90% of it. She has a very big role to play at the end. Yeah, okay. But I feel like that made it a little bit abrupt. We are not with this character for any page time whatsoever. We have that one very short stint in the beginning. We don't hear from her. We don't have a POV from her. Like one POV, I think, the whole thing. Before we get to the end, obviously. We just get that one POV, and it just felt like, if you didn't read the first book like recently, she did not feel important. Ju barely even thinks about her. I feel like Ju was so much more focused on Ouyang and the obsession with him, and how they're similar, and their whole like torture porn relationship, where she had to like hurt him to make him forget about his mental pain. Like, all of that was so messed up, but I feel like she was so invested in that relationship that Ma was just like completely out of head, out of mind, you know, out of sight, out of mind. And then at the end, she's playing like such a massive role. And I do really like Ma. I think she's one of the only characters with empathy and thinking about what's right, and thinking about the bigger picture rather than just what she wants. So I really like that, and I liked Ma, and I wish she had a couple at least POVs. Maybe she could be involved in some of this. Like, I know maybe it's slightly annoying to have her, to write her in the scenes, but it just felt like so... Now we need her, let's take her off the shelf and play with her a little bit. And obviously, I actually really like the end, where you really see how her warm nature and her kindness and her empathy, which is not anyone else exhibits in the story, actually brought Bajon, I don't remember his name, the great Khan, or the, you know, the brother, the Henan prince, brought him from this precipice, he's like way freaking jumped over the precipice. He's in the crazy town, he's hateful, he's like, I'm gonna be what everyone thinks about me. I'm gonna make everyone hate me. I've killed everyone, blah, blah, blah. And she brings him back, and she makes him freaking weep because he got her pregnant and he can be a father. And I don't know, it's just like showing that this kindness, maybe if more people had her kindness and her empathy, actually we could get somewhere. Because maybe what hurt people need is kindness rather than shitting on you more and hurting you more. And I'm just realizing that I'm saying this, and I actually really like that. And then I like that Ju chose kindness in the end. She was like, if my first act is to kill this man, how am I starting? I'm like, girl, you're basically a war criminal. At this point, you've killed so many people, who cares? But fine, whatever. Like, I will say that really showed the necessity of her brother dying, or her like adopted, I don't know, friend, brother dying, which was a really sad scene, and it did like make me a little bit teary. But it showed the necessity of him dying, because that was the only thing that brought her back and made her kind of reflect a little bit. I do think that even Ma was like, it's a bit deep that so many people died for you, but you only care when it's your brother, but like whatever. But I agree, but at the same time, like, I do see the necessity of his death and how that impacted the end. And at first I was like, does he have to die? Is it just like because you want to make us sad? But I like how much of an impact that made for the main character, and how it addressed her story and her decision in the end. The story is just so messed up. Like, there's so many ways in which sex is used to manipulate people. Like, even the fact that Zhu had to sleep with that pirate, it was so icky. I guess it shows how far they're all willing to go to give their bodies up for this like other purpose. And I did really like how that was also addressed, like with the Madame Zhang, who was a courtesan and now is a queen, but she still has that, because of everything that happened to her when she was a courtesan, she has this like complete removal from her body. She does not see her body as part of herself in any way. It's like, it's her and her body, like two separate entities. And obviously you see how her body reacts to some things emotionally, but like, she doesn't even see that as herself. So I really like that dissociation shown and like really emphasized of how damaging it all is, and how, you know, sexual violence or whatever, like that type of violence really affects you. So that was all done really well. I mean, I do think that this is one of the most interesting stories I read. I think I feel just so like, I don't know if I like it, because it was just so harrowing and difficult and messed up, but at the same time it brought so much value. It made me feel so much and made me think and made me empathize so much, that it's kind of crazy that the author was able to achieve all of that with just 2 books, and this book still packed such big punch. And that's when, to me, the book sang and the book really lived, like when we weren't focusing on the battles and on the strategy, but we were focusing on the people and the characters and the choices they make. And I think that's why personally I was more interested in all the perspectives that weren't Zhu or Yang, because they were all together. Like, well, when they were together they were interesting, there was a lot of interesting stuff there, but when they were apart it was like strategy. But for me, it's more like, I loved reading from Madame Zhang. I found her fascinating. I loved reading from the Prince of Henan, the future Great Khan, fascinating. And what was really funny, when I realized, like when I was reviewing book 1, I referenced Empress Ki, the Korean drama, which I didn't even connect the dots, that this is the exact same time period that the 2 things are talking about, but a vastly different perspective on them. It's so funny, because Lady Ki is obviously the protagonist of the Empress Ki story, and in that she becomes an empress. So I don't like, from reading the Wikipedia page, this book is not historically accurate whatsoever. Like, the Prince of Henan was never the Great Khan. The Great Khan, he died like in exile or something. His son became the Great Khan. I don't think that Zhu Chengba or whatever, I don't think that he even came into power till like 10 years later than the book shows it as. But you know what, it's a great piece of fiction, and take it as fiction. But yeah, it was so funny how they were the same period of time in history, the same set of characters, two completely, just vastly, incredibly different stories. The perspective on the Great Khan, the perspective on the Empress Ki, the perspective on the Mongols, completely different. So that was super fun and really funny for me to discover, and I was like, oh my god, what a mess. But that's why, like, playing with history, I think, is just so fun, and I love playing with history, and I love discovering history this way. So I will definitely read the author's next book, whatever that may be. I do not regret owning these are beautiful, and I think I'll be thinking about this book for a very long time. I'm sure I didn't even touch on all the spoilers I wanted to touch on, but there's so much to talk about, and there's so much depth and so much feeling with this book. Maybe I should just give it 5 stars, but I was like enjoying reading it all the time. Sometimes I was, but sometimes I was like, oh, I just want to finish it. But that's also on me for putting a time period on it. So I don't know, what do you think? Like, if you read the book, what do you think? What did you give it? How many stars? What do you think about it? Did it live up to the first book? I know some people didn't even like the first book, whereas I really loved it. But I know some people were a bit on the fence or just plain old didn't like it. What do you think about the sequel? I think this is one of the most interesting fantasy books I've read recently. Probably because I read too much YA. I just need to go to adult, but adult can be really heavy and YA can be really fun. And also heart-wrenching, so YA contains multitudes. But yeah, I'm so glad the sequel is already finally out. So glad to have read it. Let me know. I really, really want to know your thoughts because I don't know how I feel. I think it's a 4-star, maybe a 4.5. Maybe with a week or two, I will have marinated my feelings. I'm so looking forward to reading people's reviews and people's spoiler thoughts because I need to know. What are people thinking? Did my review make any sense? Did you enjoy it? Like, did it make you think? Did you disagree passionately? Let me know. And let me know what you thought about my hair. My hair is, I needed a change. I was like, I want to change it. I've had it the same way pretty much since uni, which has been like 7 years. So that's boring. I used to change my hair all the time. I will say some of it already left. So now I have this, it was very red in the beginning, but now it's more natural looking, I guess. What do you think? Like it? Don't like it? Let me know. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you could comment, like, and subscribe, I really, really appreciate it. It really helps me out. But that's it from me, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!